Good evening, everyone. Welcome to AVPN's first South Asia Impact Capital Festival. I'm Hiral Sarvaiya Chauhan, Manager Partnerships at AVPN, and your MC for this session. I'm delighted to have you join us today. For those of you who do not know about AVPN, we are a network of funders and resource providers with over 600 members across 32 markets. Our mission is to move more capital towards impact. We provide social investors like yourselves the opportunity to connect with different stakeholders across markets, learn from one another, and find opportunities for action. We are also sharing the highlights of our day live on Twitter. So do not forget to share your experience with us using the hashtag AVPN South Asia 2021 and hashtag social impact. The South Asia Impact Capital Festival brings the spotlight on best practices and solutions that AVPN members are delivering across India, Bangladesh, Nepal, and Sri Lanka. This week, we focus on climate action. A few housekeeping announcements before moving to the program. To download any session resources, please click on the download icon in the agenda page beside the session title. To continue chatting with the speakers and fellow delegates, please make full use of the messaging function. Finally, please note that this session will be recorded and you will be able to access the recordings for 3 weeks after the festival. Now moving to the session. This session will focus on climate action goals and objectives set by Indian businesses in the endeavour to decarbonize and attain carbon neutrality, further moving towards a net zero goal. The session will also explore how far the Indian corporates have come in their journey in terms of understanding this landscape, applying the concept, setting the relevant goals in terms of emissions, and attaining these targets in a stipulated timeline. And now I would like to introduce you to our moderator, Mr. Sandeep Roy Chaudhary, co-founder, VNV Advisory. Sandeep, over to you.
Thank you, Hiral. A big welcome to everyone who's attending. It's quite an interesting session. It's short, but we will try and squeeze in as much information as we can for you and for the audience. Here we are. I'm Sandeep. I basically am a director with VNV Advisory Services. We're a social enterprise that works with climate action and livelihoods. And we have often been asked the question, especially with because we work a lot with carbon finance. We've been often asked a question by companies who come to us and says, look, my CEO has just declared that we're going to be a carbon neutral company. What are we to do? And that's something that's become quite a theme in the last 18 months or so. And we believe that this kind of a session could actually help as an education of sorts for businesses and to all these tree planting NGOs who come to us and say, okay, how can we look at this as an opportunity for us to be able to fund some of our programs or bring long-term longevity to some of our programs? So this session is more about, we're going to discuss some of what corporate India is doing about climate action. How does these terms kind of, I wouldn't say demystified, but given some sense of, net zero targets, science-based targets, carbon neutrality, what does it mean? And also give an highlight on how the companies approach this and how it could be possibly taken as a template for others to follow and understand how that is to be done. Having said that, Hiral, would you want me to introduce the speakers or would you? I'm sorry about.
Just
yeah,
go
Sandeep,
ahead.
you can
you
please,
mention our names.
Yeah,
don't need much of an introduction. Just move on.
Well, Anirban does not need much of an introduction. I'll introduce you anyway. So Anirban Ghosh, Chief Sustainability Officer, Mahindra Group. I don't need, he needs much more introduction than that. And we have Shipra Sharma, Chief Sustainability and CSR for L&T Infotech, known as LTI from the L&T Group. Again, does not need too much of an introduction. Because we have a very, very short span of time, I think we should dive straight into the session. I don't think I should take up too much time. I think you would like to listen to what the others have to say. here I basically start with both of you, and maybe Anirban, you can go first, is what does carbon neutrality, mean to you as a business? Where did the journey start, with the what's and how's? And could you elaborate a little bit about the goals that you've set as well? If I could start with Anirban and then over to you, Shipra, on the same.
Thank you, Sandeep. So let's look at it from first principles. If it is neutral, it means it's somewhere in the middle of the scale at a zero, neither on the positive side nor on the negative side. So if we are talking about carbon neutrality, we are effectively saying, is there a way in which we are not adding any carbon into the atmosphere from our business? Why is that a legitimate goal? Well, it's part of the Paris Accord that the world needs to be net neutral by the end of by the middle of the century. But if you look at it this way, that if carbon is the big problem, and there is already too much carbon up in the air, we have to figure out ways of not putting carbon in the air, which means you've got to keep reducing your carbon footprint. But today, given the technologies, I guess it is difficult to think of a situation where you will do business or you will run industry without any emissions at all. So if you've minimized emissions, there will still be some residual emissions left, which I guess the best way to compensate for is by removal from the atmosphere. So a combination of sharp reduction of carbon footprint and removal of residual emissions from the atmosphere through means which are acknowledged to be effective and acceptable is what we think is a good way of looking at carbon neutrality. There's a lot of conversation going on today about what is legitimately carbon neutral and what is not, but this is, without making too many complications, this is it. The Mahindra Group has committed to being carbon neutral by 2040. And we are pretty much going about it in that way, figuring out ways of reducing our carbon footprint and leveraging the afforestation program that we've had in the group for some years now.
Sure, thanks, Anirban. Shipra? Shipra, I think you're...
Yes. Thanks, Anirban. I always like the way you describe things that way, in all its simplicity. So at LTI, we have core beliefs as a company. There are 5 beliefs, and solving for society is one of the core beliefs for the company. So I think it starts pretty much with the ethos of the entire L&T group and LTI as an entity, that we want to solve for the society and obviously for the planet. So that's at one end of it. And the other side is increasingly investors are asking questions on the financial performance of the company and the ESG performance of the company. So I think at a business level, this has become a very crucial conversation. In a couple of meetings, the business deals, many a times I'm invited these days to speak about LTI's performance on ESG parameters. So I think clients also want to drive this through in their supply chain. There are some clients I observed are setting emissions target as a selection criteria for supplier onboarding. So it's essentially a conversation going beyond, a few stakeholders to a larger set of stakeholders. And therefore, there's this multiple levels of conversations all these stakeholders are having. And we have set a target to be a carbon neutral company for India operations to begin with by the year 2030. This is aligned to the UN SDGs. And I think it's quite an ambitious target because we want to do it in-house, and we have our stakeholders, our management who are driving it, who are nudging us, who are pushing us, which I think is also very helpful in driving this across the operations of the company, and also working with different teams in driving this whole agenda. So that would be my 2 cents on this, Sandeep.
Thanks, Shipra. Anirban, what would have been, I mean, Shipra touched on this motivation of why her company did that. I mean, one of the things that she very rightly touched upon is that customers are asking for it. And that is a typical straight away at the CFO office or the procurement office or the CEO's office. What would have your journey been? What would have been your motivations as Mahindra Group?
It's a very interesting story, Sandeep. It started about, I think, 13, perhaps 14 years now. Thanks to COVID, we tend to get the years wrong. In an analyst meet, one analyst asked the question, do you have a triple bottom line report? I think Pilkington had just come out with the book around that time. So obviously none of us knew what the analyst was talking about. And we went hunting as to what this triple bottom line thing was all about. And like Shipra mentioned about their organization's values, the idea of triple bottom line seemed to fit into whatever we said were our core values, which subsequently have got articulated through the word RISE. But we saw, yes, these seem to be the right things to do. And obviously we should figure out what steps we should take in this direction. That's how the whole journey started. And since carbon was seemed to be the big problem that we were trying to solve to reduce global warming or to reduce climate change, shall we say, we said, okay, what is the logical goal that an organization can possibly take? Given that it is inconceivable today that we will actually work in a way in which we will take carbon away from the atmosphere while working, we said, okay, let's at least get to carbon neutral. That's how we got started. There were many little baby steps along the way. First, I mean, people didn't believe that much could be done. So little targets were taken. Overachieving those targets didn't prove to be difficult. So we kept getting more and more ambitious. And then when we said, okay, we will reduce our carbon footprint by 25% in 3 years, we thought we were taking a big step forward. And the idea of carbon neutrality came. And, a lot of managers said, hey, I mean, this is even, how can you even think of an industrial business being carbon neutral? But as it turns out, technologies were coming along and we did some calculations and say, hey, it's not exactly impossible. And that's how we've ended up in a situation where we're feeling reasonably confident that we'll get to carbon neutrality and that the existing technologies will take us very close, but we have time. Some more new technologies will come and we'll probably get there.
And this is across the spectrum of your group, Anirban?
That's right.
Okay, that's really interesting because that's quite a huge canvas out there to look at in 20 years' time. Shipra, I mean, on the similar lines, in terms of understanding your emission breakdown, how did it work typically? Did you just say that, look, this is going to be my emission profile for the next whatever years, and this is how I need to look at it? And what was your thinking behind some of the targets that you set? Was it based on, what was it based on, or was it something ad hoc? I mean, could be both actually. So
yeah, sure, thanks. For us, I think as a company, we are a 24-year-old company, and it flows right from the ethos of the LNG group. But LTI, we started our independent sustainability journey after listing, so to say, around 4 years back. And for us to set a target, achieve neutrality by 2030, I think it was quite ambitious, and we needed a plan. We could not have done it without a roadmap in place. And so also as an IT company, our emissions would have been very, very different compared to other stakeholders in the domain. And so first step was measurement in terms of what are these outlets, what are these areas where we are emitting carbon. Of course, we don't have much significant emissions related to diesel, but in terms of our consumption of electricity in office premises, in terms of our travel, those are the significant areas we are emitting. And so the first was what are these areas and how much is it? And then see, in a business as usual scenario, where will we be by the year 2030? And the next step was obviously then setting targets that if we are to achieve at a certain level by 2030, how do we get there on a year-on-year basis? Whether it is, at one hand, reducing our carbon footprint, and on the other hand, investing in the offset programs. The third thing which we realized is we cannot do it alone. Sustainability officers just cannot drive this agenda alone. Of course, it needs a management buy-in, but you need to work with internal stakeholders to drive the agenda. You need to work with the admin, HR, with the travel team, the procurement team. There's just a whole gambit of stakeholders we need to get on our side. And therefore, I think having this conversation with them was very, very important, getting them on board. And lastly, in terms of reporting, so once we had the roadmap in place, once we had the stakeholder buy-in in place, how do we kind of then create the story around it? Like, how do we communicate it with the largest stakeholder spectrum to also make it as a business case or, to benefit the business, if I may say so, for the company, since external stakeholders were already asking these questions. So I think this has been kind of step-by-step journey for us in broadly like a 3-4 step, kind of approach. And one key thing is that, how do we really work across these stakeholders is it's been by my learning across, over the past 1.5-2 years that we've been driving this agenda internally.
No, I'm glad you say that, because, a lot of the companies have started out this journey fairly recently, especially in India, we see that. Also, you mentioned something about the buy-in. And we do see that there's management level buy-in, and then there's middle management, and there's buy-in at all different levels. Did you get any pushback? Shipra, first question to you. And how severe was that?
Interestingly, for me, it started with the CEO. So I think there wasn't really, much. I think that was a plus for me, certainly, because the moment you have a top management buy-in, it kind of sorts out a lot of other areas. And so management buy-in has been a strong driver in this case. And yes, when you communicate that, something which has happened at the board level with internal stakeholders, automatically it adds that weightage to the conversation. So I think that is a very, very important aspects for chief sustainability officers to drive it in their organizations. Because unless we have that, it will be difficult to get people on board, because this is beyond the business targets. It's not like achieving a sales target, which is critical to the business directly, if I may say so. Of course, we do get there eventually when we look at ESG, but if you, in case of direct results, it takes its own time. And so, a lot of communication, again, how do you communicate? What is in it for your stakeholders? Why would an admin person do that? Or why would somebody, within the company try to get on board? I think those were the important questions we kind of deliberated on before we reached out to them. And we were kind of able to create that story that, look, this is how LTI gets positioned as a sustainable company, and we cannot do this alone. It has to be in a collaborative approach. Yeah. And therefore, even with our employees, we were, so at LTI, we have a strong employee engagement program, across our locations. And we have been doing these sustainable living drives in the company. We have been doing a lot of e-volunteering, which also helped us during the times of COVID. And so I think that ecosystem was quite favorable. I wouldn't say it was easy, but it was favorable. And I think that kind of worked to our advantage. But it is certainly a very, very ambitious thing for companies to undertake. And it has to be done very, very strategically.
Cool. Thanks, Shipra. Anirban, pushback? You are a very different kind of company, so I would imagine your pushbacks would have been from, I don't know, or maybe your just CEO said carbon neutral, and that was that. So.
Well, before the CEO said carbon neutral and that was that, there was a little bit of pushback, a little bit of disbelief that this could even be done. And, time solves a lot of problems. So once the maths had been done, it was about getting credulity, shall we say, belief that yes, this is something that is even possible. Given the way the conversation has grown around the world, and every time there is this new big event, like there was the one at San Francisco, and then the United Nations Secretary General did an event. And every time this happens, the conversation ratchets up just that little bit more. And these goals suddenly become part of common currency. And then people like CEOs start asking questions, oh, is it at all possible? And so it was a 2-year time frame from the time we first advocated the possibility of being carbon neutral. And well, I was basically told that, no, I mean, don't live in the world of fantasy. And 2 years later, when it seemed to be, okay, why don't we give it a shot? It doesn't seem impossible. As far as colleagues are concerned, I think they've taken it on as some sort of a challenge. They enjoy figuring ways of reducing carbon footprint and becoming more energy efficient and adopting renewable energy and all the other good things that one needs to do to become carbon neutral. So those have become like, I won't call them hobbies, but they've become like very interesting things to do for a lot of my colleagues. So I have a little less to worry because it keeps building scale and building scale and building scale as we go along.
Sure. Thanks. No, I mean, we see that from different kinds of companies have different kinds of pushback scenarios, and some of you are quite evolved, some of you are not getting into the journey, and we keep hearing about these stories. Just want to move the discussion towards what you mentioned as reduce what you can, but neutrality needs offsets as well, especially in the short term, if not in the long term. In the long term, while the technology picks up and we have cleaner fuels and cleaner electricity and so on and so forth, things will change. But on that offset theme, and this is something that we have seen that, companies which are looking at intrinsically offsetting and going towards carbon neutrality tend to do a lot more about climate as a whole. And that's globally, we've seen that. In India now, we have about 28 odd companies who have declared that we're going to be carbon neutral and so on and so forth. A lot of them will basically get into that offset space because that's going to be the way to actually be neutral in the short term. Where do you see this heading? I mean, globally, we've been working with global companies where the theme has been livelihood-based projects, nature-based projects, and so on and so forth. Now, nature-based suddenly has become the buzzword about how you can look at offsets and how that offsets could possibly tie in with your business strategy as well. How do you guys see it? If I may start with Anirban first, how do you see this space developing for your company or your peers in this or the sector as a whole in the country, really, if you have any view on that?
Sandeep, today we don't have a way of living life on Earth without causing emissions. We are finding new ways of living life on Earth with lesser emissions. Once electric vehicles and storage and all of this happens, hopefully the quantum of emissions that happens in a year from different parts of the world will go down, but it will never get to zero as of now. Okay, so the need to remove carbon from the atmosphere is critical and must be done. We know that nature had a balancing system. Trees and oceans used to take carbon out of the air. We as human beings have worked very hard to impair nature's ability to take carbon out of the air. So the least we can do is at least restore some of it, even as we try to figure out how to do business or how to live life with lesser emissions. So that's how that's our view on it, really. I mean, there is no ideology, there is nothing. I mean, it's very simple mathematics, way of life, technologies that we have, unintended consequences of technology. And while we must try to keep reducing our emissions, we must also look at carbon removals. Now that conversation can go further. Imagine a time where amongst the new technologies we've discovered are some where we can take carbon out of the air in an economically feasible manner and in a manner which is of value for you and me as ordinary citizens and consumers. That will then set the cat among the pigeons, because then carbon removals will start happening at scale. Now, I don't know if it is possible. I don't even know if there is a lot of work happening on it. But till the time we get there, good old trees and good old oceans must do their work, and we must stop making it difficult for them.
Just a quick follow-up, a quick interjection from you, if I may. On the removal part, while there's the nature-based part, something that sprung up to mind, you work with a lot of design concepts within your value chain. Now, has circularity in that also come as a removal concept, or is it more of an efficiency concept? Now, does that tie in with the neutrality in a more overview manner, if you may?
No, in the scope 3 area, it definitely does. So if you were to ask me, okay, so you're using a lot of steel and there is a lot of embedded carbon in the steel. Yes, there is. So if you bring circularity in and you use recycled steel, then the extent of embedded carbon goes down just that little bit. So yes, of course, circular economy does play a part, but it doesn't take away from the need to do removals. Today, removals through natural means, which is actually just restoring the planet's ability to do removals. And hopefully we will use our innovation to figure out economically feasible, consumer-friendly ways or consumer-useful ways, shall we say, of taking carbon out of the air without causing some other unintended consequence, which we then have to solve at a later point in time.
Yeah. It's a battle against time. We're always playing catch up here. Shipra, over to you.
Yes.
How do you view the offset space, and how as a company are you looking at it, and so on?
Yes. So before that, just a quick, add on to what Anirban was mentioning about these technologies, and something which I came across, that, converting carbon into tiles and converting carbon captured from the atmosphere into ink are some of the innovative solutions. And so I think as a company, one of the key things we are also doing is investing in startups to promote innovation in the arena, because that is very, very important. Clearly, what we are doing today is not enough. And it's really more of a problem of innovation than lack of means. That's how we look at it. So that's one of the important areas of investing in these startups with brilliant ideas on the climate front, and also for solving for society. So that's one of the pieces. Another thing which we are doing is investing in community-based programs. So yes, the traditional tree plantations and farm pond projects, which also help in increasing livelihood. So again, what is the need for the community there? Because then they see some sort of income coming in from those projects, and they become the guardians really of these projects, because it is practically not possible for a company to monitor these projects. You can plant a tree and you can leave it to die, or you can leave it to survive. I mean, who monitors them? So we are working with agencies to help us measure that. And also in terms of, how do we kind of report on these plantations 10 years down the line till we achieve neutrality. So as a company, we have not so far invested in carbon credits. We do not plan to. I can't really tell you what's down the line. 10 years is too long a time in this dynamic scenario. We are investing more on these programs where also these farmers are able to produce more crops, where these communities can earn some livelihood out of these trees. Sandeep.
Thank you, Shipra. I'm so on board with that thought process. I mean, that's how I think the neutrality space should move, but that's just me. Anyway, going back to this discussion of integrating all of this into business. Anirban, I know your company has an internal carbon price, and it would be really interesting for us to understand how you arrived at it, or what was it? Was it the back of the hand? Was it some massive exercise? A lot of it comes out as something which we have so many terminologies out there: shadow carbon price, this carbon price. Can you just, quickly, a quick reckoner, if you may, in terms of how this is done? You're on mute, Anirban.
Yes, yes. So we could do a long conversation on this, but let's not get enamored by the idea of carbon price. It's a means to an end. The end is to reduce your carbon footprint. The carbon price is a sort of an incentive to move you, or let me not say incentive, it's a trigger to move you from a path which is high on emissions to a path which is low on emissions. There are many ways in which it can be done. We've adopted one. The one we've adopted is saying that for every ton of carbon that we emit, we will invest $10 into technologies that are low carbon in nature. And by doing so, over time, our emissions will keep going down. And we said over a 3-year period, we will reduce emissions, specific emissions, by 25% by investing these $10 per ton of carbon emitted. This was from the period 2016 to 2019. I am happy to say that the goal was achieved. Now we've got it going for another 3 years, and I'm hoping at the end of 2022, we would have reduced specific emissions by another 25%, and that will keep us on the track to become to science-based targets and carbon neutrality. Is $10 good or bad? That's a question that I'm faced all the time. One has to understand the subject a little to converse knowledgeably on $10 or $50. But let me just put it this way. If you can use a $10 price and get to carbon neutrality in the time frame that you're saying you will get to carbon neutrality, I would say please go ahead and do it, because becoming carbon neutral by that time is more important than the value of your carbon price today.
Sure. Thanks, Anirban. I mean, I think that's a point well made. It should not matter whether it's $5 or $50. It's your organization and how you're looking to price it. Shipra, this is a very short session, so I'm kind of catching my breath as well. Shipra, just quickly, your organization has how many people now? How many thousands?
32,000 across 31 countries.
Okay, so now that's a very large span of people, but
yes,
you are a people-centric organization. And I want to take that discourse into, I mean, because there is manufacturing conglomerates, they work in a slightly different manner or emissions profile, if you may, than you. You're people-heavy. How do you look at climate action? Because you guys are not traditionally looked at as the guys who are doing the bad job or creating this problem as such, but a lot of people footprint, that means a footprint. So how do you look at it, Shipra?
Yes, Sandeep, thank you for asking that question, because as an IT solutions provider, typically we are not perceived to be, if I may say, like a manufacturing unit or any other sector for that matter. But yes, like I said, I think for us, the starting point was defining these, these emission factors. We consulted experts to kind of, come up with that roadmap. Because also there aren't many examples in the ecosystem for us, as best practices, at least when we started out. And everybody has a different journey. I mean, every organization will have their unique challenges. They will have their unique pluses. So I think we kind of put that together. And again, one point quickly here is people are also a big plus in the whole thing, because it's ultimately them who help us achieve it. So I think behavioral change is something we have focused on, and that kind of helps, from the bottom to the top. It doesn't remain a single person's idea. It becomes an idea of 32,000 people we have in the company, and that kind of everybody's moving, helps us move in the same direction. So I think we view it as a plus, and that's something, even through our CSR initiatives, we've been trying to drive. So one quick example is we have an app. So the moment employees complete 50 kilometers, there's a pedometer, a tree is planted in their name, and they can download a certificate from the app, and after they do 10 trees, they get like a physical certificate with the details of the trees, and they can track the. So I think doing this across the globe has been very interesting in also creating that sense of contribution among all the employees.
Anirban, where do you guys, you also have some thousands within your group. I mean, how does this work? I have got just a prompt saying time's up. So quick concluding remark on that, Anirban.
Yeah, I think that's an amazing program, Shipra. I'm going to try and get my guys to copy it if they can. We have a program called Make Sustainability Personal. So we have to dream up wonderful ways of trying to get people engaged. Usually we manage to engage about 10 to 15,000 people each year doing all sorts of different stuff. But details some other time since we are out of time. I do want to mention one thing for anyone who took note of the carbon pricing conversation, that if the carbon price is a trigger to shift from a low carbon path to a high carbon path, then depending on the alternative being considered, the carbon price or the trigger would necessarily need to be different. So thinking that the same trigger will work for everything in every place, not the right way to do it. The way to think about it is, okay, what do I need to move from this high carbon path to this low carbon path? Heroes appeared. I think that's a big enough signal.
Thank you. Heroes appeared. So I just want to conclude. Thank you so much for the two of you. I think it was a nice conversation, though a little bit rushed, I have to admit. But thank you so much. Large organizations, it's interesting to know what's what's out there and cooking. So yeah, over to you, Hiral. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Anirban and Sandeep, for that insightful conversation. We are sorry we are running out of time and we could not take a lot of questions that we've received from the speakers, but many thanks for an insightful conversation. At this point, we would like to thank the kind support of our festival partners, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Sesame Workshop India, Rockefeller Foundation, COVID Action Collab, VNV Advisory Services, the British Asia Trust, WPP India CSR Foundation, Catalyst Management Services, and Satwa. To continue chatting with your speakers and fellow delegates, please make full use of the messaging function. And do not forget to share the highlights of this session by tagging us with the hashtag AVPN South Asia 2021 and hashtag social impact. Up next, we have a session on mitigation opportunities for climate philanthropy in India, which will be live in just a few seconds. Thank you, and please enjoy the rest of the festival. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Sandeep. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Shipra.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.